Ignite your curiosity with Austin Next. We're watching Austin transform from a thriving ecosystem into a global superstar. With our host, Jason Scharf, we aspire to better comprehend the true nature of innovation. Together, we will uncover what makes a successful ecosystem and navigate the technologies shaping our future. Now let's dive into what's next.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Austin Private Wealth, a registered investment advisor focused on fee-only financial planning and investment management. Their mission is to serve affluent clients with personalized financial advice, fostering a trusted relationship that will endure for generations to come. Austin Private Wealth is not just about managing wealth. They're about inspiring you to embrace a future filled with possibilities and helping you architect enduring legacies. Their core values of integrity, service, caring, excellence, and growth are at the heart of everything they do. Connect with them today at austinprivatewealth.com.
Austin Private Wealth is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Austin Private Wealth and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advice may be rendered by Austin Private Wealth unless a client service agreement is in place. Investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional.
John Sibley Butler holds the J. Marion West Chair for Constructive Capitalism at the McCombs Graduate School of Business here at UT Austin. His focus is on both management and sociology. He's also the Sam Barshop Fellow at the IC Squared Institute, an organization dedicated to the creation of new ventures throughout the world. In addition to his tenure at UT Austin, Professor Butler is also a visiting professor at Aoyama Gakuin University in Tokyo and the University of Southern Maine. He has served as a consultant for the United States military, State Farm Insurance, and many others. He was also part of the economic advisory team for Governor George Bush's successful 2000 presidential campaign. Professor Butler received his undergraduate education from Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, and his PhD from my alma mater, Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Finally, John has appeared on over 30 radio and television programs, now including the Austin Next podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Go Cats. How are you doing today?
Doing quite well.
Good. Good to be here. And welcome to Austin.
Thanks a lot, John. We're really happy to have you. Well, let's try to get into it. We've seen a tremendous amount of growth in Austin over the past several years, and that growth has been built, obviously, on a strong foundation. And it's that history we want to talk about today. A history that's shaped by individuals leaving their mark, the institutions or companies that scale ideas into growth, and those moments of inflection when something truly has changed. To you, what are the most important people, institutions, and events that paved the way in Austin?
Well, I think when you look at it, I can tell you this. Austin is the development of one man, the way we have today, and that is George Kosmeski, the founder of Teledyne. He came here to be dean some years before I got here. And I can just remember in 1978, I got here in 1974, seemed like it was yesterday, called everybody together and he said, my kids won't have anywhere to work. We were losing our best and brightest to Boston and to developing Silicon Valley, and indeed to Houston and to Dallas. And Austin was more of a playground, always a very, very gorgeous city of hills and lakes. But the great opportunities could be found, we can say, in government and the University of Texas. Now, State Farm had moved here and IBM was developing here. So without a doubt, it was George Kosmeski who drew out Austin. And we started to think about different models of how it should be done. So, of course, what we wanted to do was to say that, look, if we look at the great centers that's developing, and Silicon Valley was really created by 128 in Boston. That is, doing business in Boston and being creative in Boston, you had to belong to the right families, belong to the right clubs, etc. So Stanford opened up his arms and said, why don't we come here and let's talk about the relationship between science and technology. So George started the IC Square Institute to really bring people from across the campus. And this was a huge inflection moment for Austin and the University of Texas. Great enterprises start with science. They do not start with management, accounting, or finance. It starts with science. If you look at Carl Moore's book, Birth of the Multinational, 2000 BC, then we began to see relationships. Remember, we were all professors, so everything we did, we also documented. So the big thing came when the IC Square was created. And then from IC Square came our laboratory, which was the Austin Technology Laboratory. It also meant moving the university away from just being the university to a relationship between academia or science, government, and industry. And then we looked around, and remember, here's the startling statistics. Since 1970, 98.9% of all the great companies in America that scale have come out of three places. For Silicon Valley, the mother of all mothers, have done it all, from Hewlett Packard to Hotmail to eBay to Google to you name it. Austin, we've done well with Dell Computers, Evolutionary Technologies, Glowfish. John did Whole Foods. John Mackey did Whole Foods. And of course, National Instruments with Jim Tressard, and just boundless other companies that were acquired. So what we're doing then is looking at a model. It's a model that puts science and technology first. And then you have to have the investors. The thing about those companies that started in these areas, I mean, Micah was 19, Gates was 20. They were all very, very young students. So all of these companies that scale, Federal Express with Smith, he was very, very young. There was a relationship between the changing science, or making science and technology at the very, very front of how you think about enterprise. So from my point of view, Microsoft is a computer science company. Uber is a computer science company. When you put science and technology first, then you ask other kinds of questions. So we always had, a city always had this, right? Okay, we're going to pay a company to come here, give them some tax base, and let them create some jobs. That's one leg of the stool. The other leg of the stool is, okay, we're going to help scale you. But the startup leg is what America doesn't get. And so we started with a certain kind of vision that came from George, the founder of Teledyne, who also he was from the University of Washington, but did a lot of stuff in California. And from that, the Austin Technology Incubator with Laura Kilcrease and a bundle of professors from engineering, Dale Tessar, Bob Peterson from marketing. And we started, and it started running, and then the cluster, Michael Porter's cluster dynamics kicked in. And then, of course, the government came from people like W. President Bush was the governor, and actually the city really quarterbacked. Glenn West quarterbacked everything, and then Ann Richards came in when Ann Richards was here, and Austin became a center to think about how to create jobs and how to create wealth. So I think the first inflection point was George bringing it together, and then bringing together government and industry and science or academia. That was the first point. And then the next question was, how do we really, really begin to fund these companies?
So I want to dig a little bit. So when George first created IC Squared, how was it structured? What was, where was the ideas coming from? You said, obviously putting science first, but kind of how did all of that come together in actual practical day to day?
Well, if you think about a typical university, we're in colleges, and then we're in disciplines. What IC Squared was designed to do was go across campus and to bring faculty members with great ideas together internally first. So George created endowments for those faculty. So we had faculty from pharmacy, from engineering, from the natural sciences, from the liberal arts, and from the business school. So it was a juggling, if you will, or a reimagination of what the university should look like. So we would get the endowed professors together, and when I say endowed, it was a named professor. I was Sam Barshop. Sam was the person who created the La Quinta Inns. And so that was the first structure. All of a sudden, you're meeting people from other areas. Business history, very, very important. And it was called the Institute for Constructive Capitalism at the time. So that was the first structure. Then what happened was that we decided that the best and brightest minds are always not just where we are, but somewhere else. So we created national IC Square Fellows, and we would have a meeting every year. And they were international fellows. They came from China, Japan, Germany, France, all over to create a synergy of innovation and to ask what we call unstructured problems. Unstructured problems were problems that really seemed to have no answer. But Pergogine, who had won the Nobel Prize, for example, and how it was utilized in that structure, won the Nobel Prize on self-organizing things in the universe. One of our first unstructured questions was, as we put Austin together, were things self-organized, or would we have to organize it? So that's the first structure. The structure was reimagining the university, going across the disciplines, bringing science and business together. And remember that if you start with science, where would the science come from? Austin, like Silicon Valley, was built on DoD technology. So therefore, what we would do is to say, look, what's sitting on the shelf? And remember, in the mid 1980s, the government stopped funding privately on innovation centers and created something called major research universities. So we were trying to get in on that act. Governor Connolly had come through years earlier, the Governor Connolly of President Kennedy assassination. He said, look, here's the deal. If the state does not get its university together, all the money is going to the East Coast, University of Chicago, Northwestern, and Stanford, or the West Coast. So that was a change that we had to respond to. And Texas and North Carolina are two of the few, quote, Southern universities, although I consider Texas not to be Southern since I'm from Louisiana. This is something else. This to me, this is more like, the crap from Northern California. You like that, huh? But anyway, seriously. So what happens then, we had to bring in the science. And if you think about what we did, we said, okay, let's get the students. Here's some science, and let's build a business model around that science.
I want to go back and dig a little bit on one of the things you just said. When you talked about creating IC Squared and launching it, you talked about one of the questions that you had was whether or not this was going to be self-organizing or whether it was going to have to be organized. And I know in other parts of the country, that's been one of the huge questions in terms of how to duplicate this kind of innovation center.
Yes, it has been. What we do, it comes from Pergogine's work. And what we decided was not only that we have to really organize it, but it did become self-organizing once the synergy got there here at the University of Texas at Austin. But the other thing was the mechanism by which you need to create wealth. That is, we had to organize the wealth in Texas, which at that time was mostly oil and gas. Everybody was wondering, what is Kosmeski doing? What is Laura Kilcrease doing? The legislatures were saying, what are you school teachers doing trying to create company? And then, of course, as industries came on board, for example, the software industry was organized. So we organized an element of software, which is now the technology. And then we had to organize, as wealth was being created, Jamie Rhodes began to organize all of the wealth in the state. So you have these institutional arrangements that must play an important role. For example, NASDAQ was organized to create wealth for the quote cowboy kind of companies to separate it from the regular stock exchange. So self-organizing, what we do is always a question. That's based on the sociological concept that, of course, people are organized to try to solve a certain kind of problem. And so we started by organizing, but then, of course, as synergy developed, and I can say right now, and I do lectures all over the world. When I was director of IC Square, I took the model all over the world. I have a book with Dave Gibson on the Austin model called Global Issues in Technology Transfer. But you're absolutely right. You have to understand how these things really, really organize. Now, the thing about Austin is we were really, really playing. I think that Silicon Valley grew up haphazardly in an interesting kind of way. For example, Silicon Valley, they do their stuff in engineering because the entrepreneurship is in engineering rather than an institute like IC Square. And so I think that the organizing principle is very, very important for anything that we do. And in this case, remember that we were so long organized around educating kids, getting kids a job, and that's still going on. But when you add the three-legged stool, and then of course you look at and you say, well, what's going on? And then Dell Computers did very, very well, which of course was our eminent case study, if you will. And of course, I think when Micah went public, he created in the Austin area 935 millionaires. That's like 30 million in the bank. So that was new for us. And one other thing I might mention is that if you look at the history of American enterprise and how wealth is distributed, basically you had investors, you had management, and you had unions, and you had income. And of course, the unions would meet with management to make sure that they can have a piece of the pot. And there are, of course, demonstrations and riot. Well, we're not a union state here in Texas. And what we did was to replace that model with shared prosperity. There was a professor at Stanford that came up with something called stock options. And so can you imagine if you're working for a company and all of a sudden, like an Apple or Macintosh, at the time, all of a sudden you have stock options that's not worth anything, and you become successful. All of a sudden you have 50 million in the bank. Well, that's replacing the tradition of unions with shared prosperity. It's not a matter of saying that one is better than the other, although I'd rather have the 50 million, but it's a matter of organization structure. And so the new model was, okay, if you start a company, build your workers into the company. If you look at what happened with John Mackey and Whole Foods, and we had a big flood of 81, and he had a little small store down at 12th and Lamar. The whole store was flooded, and all of his customers came in and rebuilt the store. Yeah. And that's when I knew the Whole Food was a religious sect rather than just
more than just a business. Yes.
More than just a business. Yes.
Let's talk about Dell for a couple seconds, because I've heard the story of the Dellionaires, if you will, several times in the last few months. How did that impact the city of Austin?
Well, it did two things. First of all, it was interesting because we had developed investors from oil and gas, and there's a difference between investors that's coming out of corporate America and investors who created their own firm. We had something called the Capital Network that George started, and these were people who had done well in oil and gas, The capital network were people who had started companies themselves. And what I saw was that there's a big difference between you starting your own company and helping out, and you coming out of corporate America and helping out. I think the corporate America people are coming from Wall Street and helping out. I really do not understand how to really start a company from A to B with just the technology and nothing. So, but it really impacted us in a lot of ways. Number one, all of the 501Cs for the Boys and Girls Club, the giving in Austin, Texas, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the different, and I was doing with Ben Barnes, we did the Boys and Girls Club. So we did that. And they also organized, we had something here that died called Austin 360, right? As people came in. So it gave the city a big uplift in the wealth that we had never had before. I think when I got here, and you must have wealth to start companies, in Austin proper, it was the people who owned the car dealerships that made up most of the wealth. And we had a mayor named Roy Butler, no relationships, by the way, that was there also. So it gave a sense of wealth in the community, of support. People called upon them to fund different kinds of things. And also, they really wanted to invest in startups. But as I said, it was different between them investing and the person who had started his own, oil and gas rig from zero. And I think that's true today. I think the difference is that the corporate guys think more of division, what you should do and what you should do. The startup guys, you do it all. But it had a tremendous impact on the city and the restaurants and the housing industry and those kind of things.
We've talked a lot about, I think, the oil and gas influencing then into the technology, and then obviously the Dell millionaires making that influence. One of the things that I found interesting recently is, while we've been known for computers and semiconductors, today you'll find space companies, consumer tech, life science, CPG. How do you see that kind of diversification in sectors that we've kind of evolved from? Where's that kind of coming from?
Well, yeah, you know what? I just talked to Laura Kilcrease last week, and we talked about this. Laura Kilcrease is now doing innovation in Canada. She was our first director of the Austin Technology Incubator. So let's talk about Austin 1.0. Okay. Austin 1.0 really did not have any wealth, and the wealth was brought in from the oil and gas. And you're exactly right. Austin 2.0 developed around software. And leading that charge was Kay Hammer's company, Evolutionary Technology. Kay Hammer was a professor of medieval philosophy. You know that all the philosophy professors, coding is simply Aristotle's logic when you take a close look at it. And so we developed a software council, right? Then you had all of the fab. We definitely cut our teeth on software. The very, very first Austin 3.0, one of the very, very first companies to go to the bio side was really the company that I first funded, called Glowfish. Alan Blake, former finished from UT Austin, former student at the Macomb School of Business, and Rich, they had this wild idea that we could take the data from the National Science Foundation, and they were trying to create a fish that was pollutant, that was sensitive pollutants, like the bats in the cave. And so Alan came here, right here in my office here, and I did the first funding for something that was called Glowfish. And all of a sudden, I knew nothing about science and genetics, although I have a sister who's a geneticist. And all of a sudden, we had a lot of interesting things happen when we launched the company. California, of course, being the People's Republic of California, as I refer to it sometimes, refused to sell them. There was a place in Canada. We had it in a store, and the Canadian said, "All right, wrap it up, put it in cellophane, make sure it doesn't interact with any other companies." But I say that because there was nobody in Austin to build a board around. The bio had not been here. There was no medical school here. And so we really worked hard. It was Austin and Alan Blake and I when we first started. And then I added Bill Cunningham, who was former chancellor of the UT system, former president of the University of Texas, and former dean of the business school, but more importantly, one of my best friends. When we launched that company, we were front page of the New York Times. We were the lead story on ABC News, lead story on CBS News, but it wasn't all good. It was the whole idea that glowfish would destroy an ecosystem. And you would wake up one morning and the glowfish would be eating with you. The whole idea that we were messing around with technology. But the New York Times did say the following: in the future, we'll look back at the commercialization of biology, and we'll look to a company in Austin about an aquarium fish that glows called glowfish. So I think that, and this was before we put the medical school. So, Austin 3.0, I think, is going there. And then what happens is that all of a sudden, what I call our magazine effect really took place. One of the untold stories is that George Kosmetsky and Michael Dale flew to New York City and asked Fortune magazine to put us on the cover of Fortune. And that was Kay Hammer's company, Evolutionary Technology. And that is creating a synergy to say that Austin is now a place to be to really, really start your company. So we were like the best place to do business, the best startup, the best city, and everything. To get up to Austin 4.0, then the other leg of the stool kicks in. Apple comes here. All these companies start to move here, with the latest, of course, being Tesla. But in between, everything comes here. So what are we doing now? You've got two things going on. Well, number one, I always ask, who are the companies that started here? Because they're good to the city. There is a Dell, for example. There's a Dell a hospital here, and a Dell Community Center here. And I'm sure Microsoft has the same thing in Seattle, but I think their home is Seattle. So what's happening now is that we hope that the increase in firms coming here does not kill our creativity. Because remember, Austin is startups, Houston, tons and tons of Fortune 500, Dallas, tons and tons of Fortune 500s. So all of these, quote, new companies that happened in my lifetime are now also big time. So right now, we're the place where we're getting to be like a New Orleans or San Francisco. There's a lot of coming and goings. There are lots of conventions. And that means, of course, that the model for the city changes a bit. That is, there'll be a lot of people in downtown area coming and going to conventions and et cetera. What we hope happen, Jason, is that people that will come in these corporate firms will look out and see that we have the ecosystem set up for startups. And the best and the brightest will leap out and say, why should I make $200,000 a year? Let me solve a problem and become an entrepreneur. So I think that the base was there and the ecosystem was there. And when the ecosystem is there, you can look around and you can say, I can do that also. So going ahead into the 5.0s and 6.0s, we hope that it continues to be a mixture of startups and a mixture of new ideas. And we also hope that the universities, not only the University of Texas at Austin, Baylor in this core today has done a great job with undergraduates. Texas State is just doing absolutely wonderful things. You guys know better than me that Silicon Valley is more than one city. So what I see is a continuation between San Marcos and even Baylor, that is up in Waco. And it becomes very, very interesting. So we want the model to be there as we continue to look at things. But what we don't want to do is to sell it in and become a series of robots where there's no creativity. And people do not realize that it is science and technology in the developing sciences. I can tell you this, the next, let's call it Austin 6.0, Mike will be flying around Austin like a bumblebee. That is, there are people who are working on flying Ubers. They're getting the flight path to fly me from my home here to the University of Texas. That means the buildings we have to change for landing stuff. There's the EV cars that's coming here because John Gillow won the Nobel Prize here in batteries. So we're looking forward to self-driving cars. We're looking forward to smart trains between Austin and Dallas and Houston and the Hill Country. I can remember when Herb Kelleher, who my dear friend, bless his soul, he passed away, and we raised the money for the Herb Kelleher Center, and he was a dear friend. I mean, a dear friend. When I went to the Hall of Fame at LSU, he was there. I was shocked that he was sitting in the audience. So we look forward to Austin being a center, but you have to really, really maintain the creativity. And you have to also have a government that understands that business and science are very, very important and don't tax people to death.
What are the structures? Obviously, you've mentioned two, the university and a governmental structure that is supportive. But if I can, in the field, what are the structures that need to be in place for that Austin 6.0?
Yeah, well, first of all, everything starts with wealth, all right, for investment purposes. And the science would come from government. That is, the government funds sciences. And the factors are accounting firms, people who understand finance. The only difference between us and ancient people is finance. The idea that we can look to the future and create mathematical models that will give us some sense about the future so that we can invest in the future. So if you had invested at Northwestern University in a life insurance policy at $15 a month, it might be worth $1.5 million because you didn't do that. You didn't do that because you were 18 years old. By the way, my wife is an undergraduate from Northwestern also.
I love it.
And so I think that you have to have the accounting firms. You have to have people who understand how to scale enterprises. That's the ecosystem. You have to have the continued investors. And you have to have people that really, really understands how marketing is changing. So, in my MBA class, in my undergraduate class, I start my lecture off by saying, look, and wherever I speak, if you want to be a movie star, where do you go? You go to LA. You want to be an opera singer, you go to New York. Country western singer, you go to Nashville. Because the elements of ecosystems are there. So, okay, you're in Nashville. And so, I need a great drummer. Well, we got a drummer over here busting tables. He's the best there is. Let's bring him in. Same thing with Hollywood. The same thing with business enterprise. You must have people who understand. The problem with creating the model in other parts of the world and the country, and I've been there before, people just do not understand the relationship between science and what it takes to launch. And one of the things is, if you look at IP lawyers, we had to teach IP lawyers that you don't have to work by the hour. Take a percentage of the company. And then when the company does well, if you're doing Microdale, you make $600 million. Okay. And teach accounting firms that you don't have to charge the startups. So you want a system out there that's organized around people who understand, or a law firm that would be the legal source for the startup that won't charge them by the hour. So all of these things kicked in, and they must be organized. I mean, what we want to do is those kind of law firms will have meetings with each other. Okay, we're going to dedicate a small percentage of our book of business to helping startups, law firms. Accounting firms, we're not going to charge you the 100% to do your accounting for you. The financial firms, if you're doing things, you really need great finance. And of course, and people who does the management of it, or let's say that the CEO of it, they must understand how important the networking is. So you put together a structure where there's something that an entrepreneur can do. Not someone that's running a corporate firm, but someone that's running an entrepreneurial firm so that they can network together. So the networking variable becomes very, very important in the structure, along with the financing and accounting, and then knowledgeable business people who understand how to scale a company. But I think that it's gonna continue to thrive. In fact, I think it's going to thrive more. It's going to thrive more because you have other companies here. So the next thing in Austin next would be South by Southwest, and all of the new companies that evolve here will create a new synergy. So we look forward to Tesla being part of South by Southwest. We look forward to Apple continue to be part of South by Southwest, because at the end of the day, all of these companies will depend upon great people, great minds. And when we say science, it's not just a university, right?
Yeah.
The new ideas that people come up with.
Well, and you took my last question, which is always what's next. But thank you so much. I appreciate the time and appreciate you joining us today.
You betcha. You guys have a great time in the great city of Austin, Texas, the city that George Kosmeski built, along with his colleagues. And I've enjoyed being here. Thank you for having me.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.